So we'll start off, it's called Eco-Poeticism and Manifesto. I'm not sure how I'm supposed to read a manifesto, if I should be really angry or, but we'll just kind of roll with it. So, 1, the eco-poem shall not be dreary or drab or sanctimonious or cloying or self-righteous. It shall not chide or scold or hector or smugly congratulate itself on its self-importance and ideologically acceptable self-righteous stance. 2, the eco-poem shall not in the end be called the eco-poem, but shall be called the eco-poem for now until further notice. We need a better name for it that does not sound so self-contained and tiny and disposable. 3, the eco-poem may be engendered by a good, dirty, filthy wallow in the dirt, actual and metaphysical. It may be engendered by the routine and sameness of day-to-day living, but it may also be engendered by transcendental flights of melancholia, ecstasy, and celebratory joy. It must incorporate rumbling, hellish lava, rushing water, and the thin, oxygen-deprived upper atmosphere into its kin and skin. It must be as familiar with the invisible world as with the deadening oak tree behind its back porch. 4, the eco-poem shall cast a wide net. It shall take a long view, a very long view indeed. It shall look beyond the human to the coelacanth and the trilobite. It shall take geology and astronomy and quasars and the Mesozoic into account. Through force or propulsion or pyrotechnics, it shall rest and make bloom a conception of the natural and unnatural worlds that is not harnessed, hogtied, and attenuated by a short-sighted full immersion in our culture's penchants for materialism, greed, and unimaginative practicality. It needs to be friendly with the chicken and chickpea, with Pluto the planetoid and the Plutonian magma depths. It needs to wrench us out of our brains and force us unceremoniously into the consciousness of a lake. It needs recklessness, freedom, mercurial motion, and imagination. It needs to be rippling and loose. 5, and yet it also needs to be rhythmic and contained, as in circles and cycles, as in the rings of a tree and the natural procession of the seasons. Even though the procession of the seasons seems year by year to be getting less assured and more irregular and strange, the eco-poem should address this fact, and quick. 6, maybe it would be best if the eco-poem stopped thinking of itself as such a separate, individualized, discrete entity and started embracing the notion of eco-poem as strand or portion or captured insect in a vast, interconnected, wildly complex web of organisms, systems, interrelationships, and surprisingly, shockingly even, entangled connection between all of those things at all times, in this world and perhaps others. Or the idea of eco-poem as plankton that may also be blue whale, or the concept of eco-poem as permeable protoplasm, or what Emerson called nature as the incarnation of a thought that turns to a thought again as ice becomes water and gas, the volatile essence forever escaping again into the state of free thought. 7, and yet the eco-poems shall not all run together. Their membranes may be porous, but their membranes do exist. The eco-poems shall have clearly delineated backyards, but they shall have frequent parties in those backyards, and allow open access to party crashers, squatters, invited guests, and mysteriously appearing apparitions alike. They shall understand how the whiskey bottle they drunkenly toss out beyond their property line affects both the homesteaders who stopped there on their way west in 1876 and the advanced silicone-based microorganism who will set up shop there in 2176. They shall function on their own and function as part of a much larger, stranger, breathing body. And then I'm going to skip 8 through 11 here and go on to 12. It seems better. 12. I find myself looking back over the last few pages at what I've written and quoted, and I recognize how I keep circling back to metaphors that are organic and bodily. I find these metaphors useful and necessary, and I want to reiterate the importance of the eco-poem's bodily functions. It should be aware of its pattern of breathing. It should be aware of the functioning of its endocrine, lymphatic, and nervous systems. It should be aware of what is circulating in its bloodstream. It should be aware of what it eats and excretes, of where what it eliminates ends up. It should be aware of how to fight off invading organisms. It should know how to reproduce itself, It should be grounded in its own skin. Michael McClure says, "It is our over-abstracted nature that does not see or feel the complexity of the body. I became convinced that poetry was about, by, and from the meat, that poetry was the product of flesh brushing itself against experience. The eco-poem shall derive its force and energy from the nerves of the body as it moves or sits still in the immeasurable worlds it intersects." 13. Once in the skin and body as object, should the eco-poem go inward or outward? Is there a way to proceed inward without getting trapped in the ego, without foundering in the shoals of the subjective self? And is there a way to project outward without becoming merely diffuse and dispersed, without getting overwhelmed and misplacing the integrity of the original kernel entirely? How should the eco-poem make its way in the inner and outer worlds? In his 1950 introduction to his translation of the I Ching, or Book of Changes, Richard Wilhelm writes about an old, ancient way of looking at things. Thus man is linked with heaven, the supersensible world of ideas, and with earth, the material world of visible things, to form with these a trinity of primal powers. Or as classical occult philosophy puts it more succinctly, as above, so below. Interdependence and interpenetration, the black holes echoing the quarks. There is no separation between body and mind. If you go deep enough into, or project far enough out of, the one should start to mirror the other. Emerson in Nature. The whirling bubble on the surface of a brook admits us to the secret of the mechanics of the sky. Every shell on the beach is a key to it. Compound it how she will, star, sand, fire, water, tree, man, it is still one stuff and betrays the same properties. And later, things are so strictly related that according to the scale of the eye, from any one object the parts and properties of any other may be predicted. A man does not tie his shoe without recognizing laws which bind the farthest regions of nature. And recapitulating the argument a few years later, Walt Whitman from the preface to the 1855 edition of Leaves of Grass. All that a person does or thinks is of consequence. Not a move can a man or woman make that affects him or her in a day or a month or any part of the direct lifetime or the hour of death, but the same affects him or her onward afterward through the indirect lifetime. The indirect is always as great and real as the direct. The spirit receives from the body just as much as it gives to the body. 14. The eco-poem shall be green, of course, but it shall also be black and white and murky, and myriad-hued and ultraviolet. Its spectrum shall be circular and multidimensional and extend backwards and forwards and sideways and slant. 15. This spot left open for further development, i.e., the eco-poem shall not use up all its space just because the space is there. Emerson again. Exaggeration is in the course of things. Nature sends no creature, no man into the world without adding a small excess of his proper quality. This exaggeration shall be respected and honored, not thoughtlessly exploited. 16. The eco-poem needs a new hairstyle. It might even need a new bone structure or a new suit of flesh. The old modes of environmental writing, the pastoral, the decoratively rural, the ornery lament, the haranguing polemic, the 31-point manifesto, the natural world as sounding board and perfect reflection for human affairs and emotions have started to wear a little threadbare lately. They don't seem to apply to the uneasy atmosphere of crisis, eruption, and rapid, dizzying change, environmental and otherwise, that bobs and weaves around us day to day. The eco-poem wants a new plan of attack, a new method by which to make its case. These old methods don't need to be retired entirely, they just need a good shaking and rearrangement, and they need lots of new supplemental cousins and sidewinders. The eco-poem needs to remember that it is a poem, and that poems have the freedom and ability to do and say and move and amble and compress in ways that other forms of writing do not. Jill Magi writes about poetry as a subversive element of ecology that insists upon individual utterance and a non-standardized performance of language. Poetry can denaturalize language and insist on language beyond the scale of mass communications and dictums. In its emphasis on the physicality and materiality of language, poetry might be free to mimic and embody and remind us of the materiality of the objects in the world. but in its inherent abstraction, it might also be free to remind us of the larger, broader, farther-reaching, mostly unseen systems and networks of which those objects are organized and inevitably connected. 17. And yet, the eco-poem shall not rest comfortably on its airy-fairy mantle of poesy. It shall be willing and open to meet on equal grounds the letter to the editor, the sweeping Jeremiah in the big monthly magazine, the science fiction epic, the well-wrought world of the 19th century novel, the dread-filled, inevitable illogic of the slapdash late-night horror movie. It shall perhaps be willing to seduce these alien genres, take them to dinner, take them to bed, and make odd new creatures with them. Nature loves a good new hybrid. Some sink noiselessly into the muck, but some take over the world. The eco-poem shall be willing to get down and dirty and experiment in the funky river bottom with its weird web-footed neighbors. I'll skip a couple here. 18 is really long, and I can't remember what I was really talking about in it. So I'll give you, okay, we'll skip this one. This one's got a longish quote. Well, we'll skip these. We'll skip all these. I'll read to the last 8, and that'll be good. 23. These are shorter, the last 8, so we'll skip the long one. The eco-poem shall radiate energy like the ice from a distant star, and shall conserve its little whirring engine of heat. 24. The eco-poem has always existed. The Holy Virgin was an eco-poem. 25. The eco-poem shall realize that its language is only one of infinite possible languages. 26. The eco-poem is somebody else. 27. The eco-poem is you and nobody else. 28. The eco-poem shall remain cognizant of its origin in the breath and the mouth. It shall respect its circumstance as a movement of sound. It shall aspire to the condition of music and shall aim to growl with vegetable and spirit. 29. The eco-poem is always aware of what Bob Dylan calls the broad spectrum and commonwealth. It is living upon and under and behind and on top of. It recognizes its place in that spectrum and commonwealth, and it glimpses, for an instant or an hour, where and when that spectrum and commonwealth materializes and disappears. It keeps its vow to the invisible republic. 30. There really are no precepts for producing the eco-poem. Its contours may be broad or pinched, rough or shapely, wild or tame. It's really just a stance, a way of proceeding through the worlds with antenna raised and eyes wide open. Gary Snyder says it's urging us to give life, to undo harm. It ends all its songs, good luck. 31, and this is a quote from the preface to Leaves of Grass from Whitman. The rhyme and uniformity of perfect poems show the free growth of metrical laws, and bud from them as unerringly and loosely as lilacs or roses on a bush, and take shapes as compact as the shapes of chestnuts and oranges and melons and pears, and shed the perfume impalpable to form. Your very flesh shall be a great poem, and have the richest fluency, not only in its words, but in the silent lines of its lips and face, and between the lashes of your eyes, and in every motion and joint of your body.